The topic of this week is the big day kahuna, right? The clothes of the Kohanim. There was a special mitzvah, in addition to building the Beis HaMikdash, it was a special mitzvah to prepare for the Kohanim very, very, very special clothing made out of very, very unique materials. And of course, as the Chazal tell us, as a rule about everything in the Beis HaMikdash, that ein aniyus b'mokam ashirus. That means to say that everything about the Beis HaMikdash had to be beautiful and grand and the best. When the clothing got worn out, they were discarded and they were replaced. They didn't really wash the Big Day Kahuna. They would replace them. And they used them for different things, depending on which begodim they were. They either used them for wicks for the menorah, or they used them for wicks for Simchas Beis HaSheyeva in the Beis HaMikdash. The Ksenis and the Avnei, they used the Ksenis and the Mitznefes, I suppose, the Migvas, they used for the menorah, and the Mechnasayim and the Avnei, maybe I'm mixing it up, but the phone is right here. And I forgot which is which, but two of the begodim, their remains, their bloim, were used for the menorah, and two were used for the Simchas Beis HaSheva, for the big torches that they had and so on. But they didn't really use them over. They didn't try to get a lot of mileage. If it was in any way damaged, not perfect, they didn't use it anymore because the big day kahuna had to be beautiful. And so we're going to be learning about the big day kahuna. And there are a number of psukim that we're going to read that seem to say the same thing over and over and over again. And we want to make two basic observations. So let's not waste time. Let's read Pasuk Aleph, Beis, Gimel, and Daled. Inside, that means page 1 and page 3 in the text of your stack. And then I'll enlighten you, I'll share with you what points we're going to be focusing on. We're obviously going to start tonight, and Kidakenu, we'll do the Chasidus on Tuesday with Eibish's help. So the pasuk begins, V'ata and you. Now right away, of course, the and you immediately reminds us of something, and that is that in Parshas Titzave, Moshe Rabbeinu's name never appears, right? So every reference to Moshe Rabbeinu is and you. And for the same reason, since it says and you, it doesn't say V'yidaber ad Hashem el Moshe le'meir. Hashem is not talking to Moshe Rabbeinu. Hashem is the narrator of Parshas Titzave, as if the first person of Parshas Titzave is the Eibush, the second person of Parshas Titzave is Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Eibush tells him, Ata and you, ha'akev elecha, bring near to you. It's Aaron Achicha, your brother Aaron. Vezbanav and his sons Itay, along with him. Mitoich b'nei Yisrael, amongst the Jewish people. Lechahanoi, to make him a kohen, to make him a priest, to make him a servant, li for me. Who are the Kohanim? Aaron, Nadav, Avihu, Elazavi, some of Nadav, Elazavi, ben Yair, the sons of Aaron. Right? There's a special inyan of bringing close Aaron and his children. In other words, you had to designate them, you had to single them out, you had to distinguish them from Klal Yisrael and make them into Kohanim. And then it says, after you isolate and identify the Kohanim, one of the Mefarshim talks at length about this idea of, so to speak, making the Kohanim different as an entity that Al-Bag, I think, talks about it also against Parichas, but other people talk about it as well. Isolating the Kohanim, then it says in Pasuk Beis, which is the focus of our class. Titzave The Kohen, you should make holy garments, la'Aaron achicha, your brother Aaron, Lkovd for honor, ulSifares and for beauty. And then it says, you should talk, el kol chachmei leiv, to all the wise men of heart, of wisdom. Hashem mileisev ruach chachma, whom I have filled with the spirit of wisdom. V'asu, and they should create as big day Aaron, the garments of Aaron HaKohen, l'kadeshe, to make him holy, l'chan eli, to make him into a kohen for me. And then it says in Pasuk Dal, ve'ela b'gadim asyasu, these are the garments they should make. Choshen is the breastplate, ve'ephod means the apron, u'me'il, and the tunic, u'ksenes tashbeitz, and the decorated shirt. I don't know how you say ksenes, there's a nicer word for it than shirt. Mitznefes is a hat, va'avnet and a gartel. V'asu v'dekedesh, and they should make holy clothing, la'Aaron achicha, to your brother Aaron, u'lavanav, and to his sons, lechahanoi li, to make them priests to me. Okay? So if you paid attention in Pasuk Beis, and in Pasuk Gimel, and in Pasuk Dalet, the same thing is repeated 3 times. You should make holy clothing for Aaron. The wise man should make holy clothing for Aaron, and these are the holy clothing you should make for Aaron and his children. 3 times, same thing is said over and over again. Naturally, there's modification between one and the next. This is the second issue on our agenda. Why did Torah repeat 3 times, make holy clothing? Okay, and I really can't hold myself in, so I'm going to give you the punchline right now. The first pasuk, Hashem is telling Moshe Rabbeinu, you should make the clothing. The second pasuk, the Eibush telling Moshe Rabbeinu to tell the Chachmei Lev that they should make the clothing. And the third pasuk, the Eibush telling Moshe Rabbeinu to tell all the Yidden to make the clothing. It's taka 3 madregas. The Shachal HaTorah points it out, and the Rebbe, the Rashab, and his Maimeh from Samachay explains it at great length. But we've got another issue on our agenda as well. And that is the first words, the pasuk, Vasisa big day Kodesh la'aron achicha, you should make holy clothes for your brother Aaron, Lkovd ulSifares, for honor and for beauty. And then the next pasuk it says, L'kadshay, to make him holy, L'chanali, to make him into a priest. And in the third pasuk it says, L'chanali, to make him into a priest. But in the first pasuk it says that the clothing of the kahuna are for honor and for beauty. Before we even talk about kahuna, the relevance of these begadim, of these clothing for the kahuna, we talk about the relevance of these begadim for kavod and tifaras. Now, let's read Rashi. Rashi is very scant. Rashi has very, very little to say. Rashi is on page 3. Okay. L'kadeshay, near the top. L'kadeshay, that you have to make special clothes for Aaron to make him holy, to make him into a priest. Says Rashi, l'kadshay, to make him holy, la'achnisei bekahuna adei begadim, to bring him into the priesthood through these clothes. Sheyehei kein li, should be a priest to me. V'lashen kahuna sheirasu. The word kahuna means service. Okay? Now, if you can quickly turn to page 5, it says, Big Day Kodesh, you should make holy clothes, mitruma, from the offerings, hamukudeshes l'shmi, which the Jewish people sanctified to my name, yasu oisam, from these special donations, from these special gifts, you should make the clothing for the Kohen. Okay? So, Rashi has very, very little to say. Rashi has very, very little to say, but if you'll analyze Rashi very carefully, from what he says, you know what he means, what he doesn't mean, what he wants to say, in other words. I'm going to leave Rashi alone. I mean, I could analyze Rashi. I have some thoughts on Rashi. I'm going to leave Rashi alone. The next is the Even Ezra. Even Ezra is on page 1. And you'll see on the right side of your page 2 successive arrows. It's the lower arrow. On page 1. V'yasisa big day Kodesh. You should make holy clothing. So the Even Ezra obviously observes, since when could clothing be holy? And he answers in typical philosophical fashion, Nikru ukein, they're called holy garments, bavoshi yisharsu bohem b'kodesh, b'makam hakodesh. They're called holy because they're used in a holy place. You cannot refer to clothing as holy in the Even Ezra's mind. How do you make holy clothing? Clothing are clothing. The holiness has to do with the purpose or with the location, because the Kohanim are going to serve Hashem in the Kodesh HaKadoshim and the Beis HaMikdash, so the clothing are holy. That's the first thing the Even Ezra says. Or alternatively, al derech, like the pasuk says, leikachu es ha'am b'begeim. They shouldn't sanctify the nation with their clothing. So my assumption is that he means to say, to separate, clothing that separate them from everybody else. Okay? And then he says, big day Aaron kulam haniskarim, all of the clothing of Aaron that are meant to be mentioned soon, are Lkovd ulSifares. See what I'm reading? Are for honor and for beauty. Translates the Even Ezra sheyisparu bahem. The Kohanim wore clothes that they boasted with. The clothing that the Kohanim wore honored them and decorated them and made them distinct and distinguished. In other words, the argument of the Even Ezra is that the word Lkovd ulSifares is not that Lkovd ulSifares has to do with the avodah on the Beis HaMikdash. It has to do with the Kohen himself. In other words, the pasuk says you make special clothing for the Kohanim, to honor them and to beautify them. Then it says, you make special clothing for the base of mikdash, for the kohenim. They should serve me. They're two separate issues. One is honoring the kohenim. The kohenim wear special clothes because they honor the kohenim. For those who do not know, there's a whole lumdis in Torah about kohenim wearing their clothes shalei b'shas ha'avodah. There's a kohen allowed to wear the big day kahuna when he's not in the middle of serving the Eibishter. So again, the point is that there's two aspects here. The first is that the kohenim wear nice clothing to beautify them, and as I started to tell you, although the halacha is, if a kohen wears the big day kahuna shlei b'shas ha'avodah is ever me'ilah. It's interesting halacha. A kohen is wearing clothes. Right? What do you tell him? The minute he finishes doing a carbon, he has to run and take off his clothes and change. It's unrealistic. You're wearing clothes. The halacha was, if a kohen is wearing the big day kahuna during a day's work in the Beis HaMikdash, he doesn't rush to take them off immediately after, it's fine. But if he wears the clothes in the Beis HaMikdash, he doesn't need them, they're not his, they're holy. And he's not allowed to wear them outside the Beis HaMikdash. He only is allowed to wear them to service of the Eivish, and if he does, he has to bring a carbon me'ilah, carbon of the abuse of kachim. This is a special din. But at the same time, the pasuk seems to say two things. First of all, the big day kahuna beautify the kohenim, and second of all, the big day kahuna qualify the kohenim to serve Hashem in the Beis HaMikdash. Okay? And I'm reading further in the Ibn Ezra, Ke'ein echad miyisrael sheyilbash ke'ela. No other Jew other than the kohenim wore such beautiful clothing. That's the Ibn Ezra. So the Ibn Ezra's contribution to our discussion is to say, first of all, that holy clothing, there's no such thing as holy clothing. It's clothing for a holy task. And second of all, the Lkovd ulSifares that it beautified the kohenim. This is the Ibn Ezra. Now we get to the Ramban. And I must say that this class really, more than anything else, revolves around this Ramban. This Ramban to me is I think it's controversial and very insightful. It's very original Ramban. And it's not just a Ramban. It's an Ramban. I know that's grammatically incorrect. It's a Ramban that encompasses, it's a message about how to approach the whole Torah. There's a very, very major question about Torah b'chalal, and that is, every Jew believes that Torah is God's wisdom and that it actually predates history. The one who, more than anybody else, underscores this notion of Torah predating history is the Ramban himself. The Ramban's introduction to Chumash gives you his opinion about what it means that the Torah was before the creation. And he holds that the entire Sefer Torah, the Chamisha Chumash Torah, including Devarim, including Deuteronomy, which supposedly Moshe Rabbeinu wrote on his own, that Eibishter God Almighty wrote it before creation. And I've told this to you a number of times, that Ramban's view is quite interesting. He says, the whole Sefer Torah, with the same letters that our Sefer Torah has, was written before creation, but it wasn't divided up into words. It was one run-on word of 305,000 and something, hundreds of letters.
In order.
In the same order, the same letters, Beis, Reish, Aleph, Shin, Yud, Sof, Beis, Reish, Aleph, Lamed, He, Yud, Mem, and so forth. But there was no division of letters. In every world, the same Sefer Torah divides the words differently and then makes a whole different Sefer Torah. Down here in the physical world, the Sefer Torah is the letters divided up in such a way that it actually has a connection to history and to time. Torah is the infinite wisdom of Hashem, which predates creation, yet the fact is, it tells stories of individual personalities who lived at particular times and particular places, correct? And the book seems to revolve around certain personalities. For example, Divrei Hayomim, the book of Chronicles, revolves around the royal family of David HaMelech. It's a book of Tanakh, and it starts with Adam, Sheisa, and Ish, with the beginning of time. Yet when you read the book, it's clearly modeled to represent or to present a model of Torah, a model of history that revolves around David HaMelech. The Chumash is a sefer which revolves around the personality of Moshe Rabbeinu. Yes, you have Avraham, you have Yitzchak, you have Yaakov, but there's no doubt about it that you cannot separate the Torah from Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was a physical man who lived at a physical point in time. And yet, the Torah that we have, which was written before creation, somehow manages to bring together a physical person who lived in a particular time, in a particular place, with the infinite wisdom of Torah that predates time and space. The Ramban here is going to tell us something very fascinating. The Kohanim wear special clothes. So the Ramban is going to say one simple thing. That was the fashion of the time. Of all people, the Ramban should say it. The Ramban is saying that the Lkovd ulSifares, the pasuk says, the big day Kodesh, the Aron HaKein, Lkovd ulSifares, he means simply, this was the most fashionable dress of the time. Let's read the Ramban inside. Page 1. Lkovd ulSifares, shehi nichpa the mufua, the Kohen Gadol, and all the Kohen should be honored and decorated, beautiful. Now turn to page 3. Okay, the Ramban is at the bottom on the right. Tell me when you're ready. B'malbushim nichbadim umfuadim, with clothing that are honorable and beautiful. As it says in the pasuk, as a chassan has to be, a kohen has to serve in beauty. Says the Ramban, Ke'ela b'gadim levushe malchus hein. These clothing were considered royal. Bidmusan kidmusan yilbush v'amlochem bizman haTorah. These kind of clothing were worn by kings at that historical moment in time. And he goes into a bunch of proofs. He brings an example from the tunic, and 2 lines later he mentions the me'il. I circled ksenis, me'il. 6 lines after that he says mitznefes. By mitznefes he says yedua gamayim. Today people are still wearing turbans, bedugma the mitznefes. And then 5 lines from the bottom he mentions ha'ifid v'ha'choishen. And at the end of the Ramban, he actually starts talking about the colors. He says the colors of the garments that the Kohanim wore, the specific Kohen Gadol, were royal. Nobody dared wear purple or royal blue, except for a king. The big day Kahuna were modeled to reflect royalty, grandeur of the time. So what's interesting about it? What's interesting about it is this. If you have a timeless Torah that predates creation, if you have a timeless Torah that predates creation, how does it coincide with a particular point in history? This is how royalty dresses. You know, it's a funny thing. It sort of complicates the whole idea that this is... In other words, if the Eibush would say to Kohanim, wear clothing, and nobody anywhere in the world wears such clothes, you say, yeah, this is divine. Nobody wears such clothes. The fact was that it reflected the royalty of the time. I'll share with you an interesting sikha from the Rebbe. It's a very interesting sikha from the Rebbe, which really enlightens this question, and it puts everything into a context. First of all, what the Ramban says is factual. That's all. It's a fact. The big day kahuna reflected the royalty of the time. But it's not the pshat that the Eibishter picked garments of that time and said, okay, I want the Kohanim to look good then. So he reflected that era. I mean, the Eibishter knows that the big day kahuna are going to be worn when Mashiach comes. Nobody's wearing breastplates nowadays. How many people walking with stones on their chest? I mean, it's a totally different kind of dress. Yeah. It's an immortal, it's a timeless garment, yet reflects that era, not because the Eibush is conforming to that kind of outfit, but because those outfits happen to reflect the ideal clothing which needed to be in the Beis HaMikdash. And I'll give you the example for this. The Rebbe has an interesting sikha, a most interesting sikha, that can be applied to a variety of different scenarios. Where the Rebbe brings like this, that in the Beis HaMikdash, there were all kinds of functions, all kinds of duties, division of labor. There were all kinds of offices. There were 15 offices in the Beis HaMikdash, 15 different appointments, and there were many sub-appointments and so forth and so on. All these different departments, and people oversaw this and that and the other thing. The Mishnah discusses the various offices, the various positions that exist in times of the Beis HaMikdash, and identifies by name the person who was the head of that committee. The Mishnah identifies by name the individual who was the head of making the Lachem Aponim, who was the head of making the Keteiros, who was the head of making the... And the Rebbe asked the obvious question, who cares? They didn't live forever. These people didn't live forever. They lived for a generation, they died, they were succeeded, okay, if it was appropriate, by a child of theirs or a relative of theirs. Otherwise, they made other appointments. No position was held for 500 years by the same person with the same name. Why would the Mishnah identify by name individual personalities for positions which were constantly changing? In the Beis HaMikdash, there were Lkovd Mishmaros. There were 24 watches of Kohanim, and corresponding 24 watches of Levim. Each Mishmar had a name. These names were their names for hundreds of years, and it was named after a personality, a father. The names of these Mishmaros were constant; they didn't change. And there's a reason in history. In other words, there's a historical reason why each Mishmar got the name that it had, and it seems odd, because a generation later, 2 generations later, 3 generations later, the name is irrelevant. It no longer has any meaning. So why does the Torah Sheba'al Peh make such a big deal out of the names of the Mamunim, of the appointees to these various positions, and make a big deal out of the names of the Mishmaros, which are constantly changing? They're very dynamic. And the Rebbe says like Lkovd, based on what the Baal Shem Tov teaches us, that a name has to do with an essence. Of course it's true that the person who made the Big Day Kohona was not always called Pinchas. His name is Pinchas HaMalbush. The Mishnah says the person who made the Big Day Kohona was Pinchas. He wasn't always Pinchas. Sometimes he was Chatzkel, sometimes he was Bedel, sometimes he was Shmedel. Maybe they didn't call him Chatzkel because they weren't Eastern European, but the name reflected the function. No matter who was in charge of the Big Day Kohuna, no matter what his name was, his pnimius was Pinchas. Because the name Pinchas, in essence, has to do with that function, even if in reality the person had a different name. And the Mishnah tells us the name of these personalities, not because technically a person by that name had that job when the Mishnah was written or when history was recorded, but because this name reflects the pnimius of this function. And the same is true in many things that go on for many, many generations and identify with a certain point in history. So many things that go on for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and they identify with a certain point in history. Why? Because that point, that person, that place, that idea is connected to this inyan forever. The Ramban is right. The outfits that the Kohanim wore reflected royalty of that time, but the Eibishter wasn't imitating what was going on then. This was how it had to be. In other words, when the Eibishter in the heaven, before we created the world, modeled the Big Day Kohuna, which of course reflect all kinds of mystical and higher meanings and higher ideas, it was meant to be this way, and that by divine intervention, that converges with the dress of the time. So actually, if you will, the dress of the time is an effect and not a cause. We're not imitating their dress. The Eibishter arranges that at the time that the Big Day Kohuna were originally designed, this should be the way people dress in the world, so that it should reflect the Torah, not the other way around.
It creates it.
That's right. And therefore, when the people's fashion changes, the Big Day Kohuna don't change. So the Ramban is saying a very interesting thing which you can correlate to a million different examples. There's so many different ideas in Yiddishkeit. It has to do with time and place.
Like 770, the number.
Fine, right. And many people come along and they say, it's Platonic. It's a reflection of a changing world. So as the world changes, the ideas should change. And yet we say, no, Yiddishkeit never changes. Think about, how could that be? The answer is, by divine intervention, the idea, the circumstance, the detail conforms to a particular form, a particular model, a particular Gashmiistic situation which is current. But that's B'hashgacha Pratis this way. This idea is written in the Torah from before time. It has to be exactly like this. The Big Day Kohuna were designed by the Eibishter before the world was created. And B'hashgacha Pratis, it mirrored what was happening in the world at that particular juncture.
In the times of Mordechai and Esther, there also were this kind of garments, let's say, and later on, possibly also. It wasn't only in this particular...
Well, it's certainly not forever. Certainly not forever.
That was also corresponding, because they had Batei Mikdash in that time. Number 3.
Number 1. Number 2, you're familiar with the dress of these different cultures? I mean, I'm not familiar.
No, but in the Megillah, what they describe, the Chemes.
The color.
They took it from the first base of
the Hemshech. Okay, still.
But the particulars, where they were Cheshnei Mishpat, kings walked around with breastplates. It's very ancient.
King's War?
Yeah, addition to the Ramban. And with diamonds on their shoulders. When was the last time you saw that?
Well, the papal vestments are...
Mahavdil.
That's
a
modeled.
That's a different
They're
story.
They're modeled.
That's Nachyama, of course.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the Ramban. Now I want you to know we read just half the Ramban. We're going to be revisiting the Ramban because the Ramban has something to say about Kabbalah. Okay? But now that we did it, I find this Ramban very compelling. And I look forward to teaching this Ramban. And again, the point is that when something in the world reflects Torah, doesn't mean that Torah took it from the world. The Eibishter arranged a convergence, but the Torah comes before the world, before the creation. And therefore, when the world changes, the Torah does not change. Torah does not change. Okay, the next thing I want to do is an Orach Chaim HaKadosh. And the Orach Chaim HaKadosh is on page 2. Okay, and he says something plain that I would like to explore. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh also has a Nigla and a Nista, page 2. We're going to do now the Nigla, and we'll get back to the Kabbalah either tonight or Tuesday, depending on how the time evolves. You see what I'm reading? I decorated it with arrows and lines and circles. That you should make the garments of the Kohen Gadol for honor and for beauty. Okay, tzarech lahavin devarav. We have to understand the words. Mahi kavanas Hashem ba'omer. What does the Eibishter mean when he says at the big day kahuna will Lkovd v'geimer for honor? Now remember, the Even Ezra seems to suggest, and maybe we're deciding for the Even Ezra what he means. It is two issues. One was to beautify the Kohen. A second was to prepare the Kohen for the Avodah. Orach Chaim HaKadosh says, what's the point of this beauty, of this honor, and what's the point of this beauty? Okay, why does the Torah have to indicate that they're for honor and for beauty? The Torah tells us exactly how to make them. If the Eibush would say, make the Kohanim nice clothing, and you go to fashion designers, and the fashion designers design them, so the Torah tells you, make nice clothing, to know that you should get the best fashion designer. But the Eibush himself is designing the clothes. Why must you preface by saying, Lkovd ulSifares? It's a no-brainer. Everybody knows that they have to be beautiful. The idea. And if the intent is to inform us, these clothes, that these clothing give Aaron HaKohen, covered with the feathers, they honor and beautify the priest, Aaron HaKohen. Why do we need to know this? What relevance does it have? So the Orach Chaim goes into a very interesting idea. And that is that Moshe Rabbeinu was a Kohen. Moshe Rabbeinu was a Kohen for a week. And he did not wear these clothes. At the end of our Pasha, Pasha's Titzave, the second half of the Pasha describes what's called the Shivas Yemei HaMiluyim, the 7 days of initiation or inauguration. During those 7 days, Moshe Rabbeinu wore chaluk lavin, a white tunic, a white shirt, a white outfit, a white cloak, gown, and he was Meshamash B'Kahuna. He was the Kohen. So the Chaim HaKadosh says that the insight of Lkovd ulSifares is to connect the big day kahuna with the Kohanim, because Moshe Rabbeinu didn't wear them. Let's see it inside. We'll try to jump around a little bit. He brings the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva, they asked Rabbi Akiva, what was Moshe Rabbeinu serving? What kind of clothing did he wear during the 7 days of initiation? So the Gemara says that Rabbi Akiva didn't know. He didn't know. Also, Vashal Bey Madrasha, so he went and he asked him the yeshiva, and Amrullah, they told him, Chaluk Lavin, he wore a white tunic, She'ein by Imra, that has no Imra. I think Imra means wool. Now the reason I say I think is because I think Imra is spelled with an ayin, and here it's spelled with an aleph, but I'm almost certain it means wool. Atkan. Hine. So the Orach Chaim says, what's the significance of this? The fact that Moshe Rabbeinu served for 7 days, Bechaluk with a white tunic, and not with these honorable clothes, Yagid, it proves, She'ein habagada ma'akfim. To serve Hashem and the Beis HaMikdash, you don't need these clothes. But Rabbi's side, there's two issues, like the Even Ezra told us. The first issue is that the clothing have to beautify the Kohen. And the second issue is that the clothing empower the Kohen to serve in the Beis HaMikdash. Moshe Rabbeinu did not need those clothing to serve in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, just for some practical advice, if you or I attempted to do what Moshe Rabbeinu did, it would be not good, right? Nobody has any business in the Beis HaMikdash except for a Kohanim. It was designated for the Kohanim alone. Nobody else has that right. If you're familiar with Jewish history, at the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, there was a Melech Yehuda, whose name was Melech Yehuda, who wanted to be king Gadol. Okay, we're all stumped. Uzzah was a Melech Yehuda who wanted to be, Uzzah was a wanted to be king Gadol, and he got up, he said, I'm a king, I can be a high priest. He got up on the Mizbeach and Yom Kippur, I saw the Aveda, and he turned white like snow. He became a Mitzayra, and he was isolated, he was quarantined, as the Mitzayra was. He was never healed, and he died in his tzaras. He lived 15 years. And his son succeeded him during his lifetime. It says that he cured. And they bring the raya from this, what it says about Makal Shkedim, that when you start up with the kahuna, the punishment is immediate. Shkedim means almonds, but shoyked means also that the Eibush is quick. Right? Vayagmal Shkedim, Vayatzit Serach, Vayifrach Peret, Vayatzit Sitz, Vayigmal Shkedim, that Shkedim almonds grow very, very quickly, to indicate that you start up with the kahuna, the punishment is immediate. So nobody's entitled to be a Kohen except for the Kohenim. You see, but that's if you're human. Moshe Rabbeinu was a different man today altogether. And the Rechaim HaKadosh doesn't even explain himself, he just assumes it. Moshe Rabbeinu was higher than Kohen and higher than Levi and higher than Yisrael. He was different. So Moshe Rabbeinu didn't need clothes. He can go wherever he wanted. He can go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he could bring Karbanos. He's above form. He's above conformity. He was so holy, he was so one with the Eibishter. He was entitled to whatever he wished. And he didn't need the clothes. So the Chaim HaKadosh is saying that the big day kahuna, Lkovd, ulSifares, honor the kahuna, but it actually is putting perimeters on the kahuna. You're a kohen when you wear clothes. There are rules. Just like a Yisrael can't do service in the Beis HaMikdash. For a kohen to do the service, he has to be boxed in. There's a certain honor, there's a certain form to the kahuna. There are certain things that need to be as requisites to put a kohen in a position to do the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, otherwise he's not qualified. It's limiting the kohen, just like it's a kohen and not a Levi. It's a kohen with big day kahuna and not a kohen with something else. Let's see what he says. He says, Ella li'aden u'levanov. The clothing were requisites for Aaron and for his children. Those two words, li'aden u'levanov, are underlined. Aval zulas hakoyenim, if not for a kohen, tisratza avodas hakarbonos b'loy begadim. A person could have his karbonos accepted with favor without the clothes. Now, who can get away with bringing a carbon other than a kohen? Now, I'm thinking out loud now. In the Bomis, they had the private mizbeches until the Beis HaMikdash was built and so forth and so on. But also, I think it was kohenim who did avodah in the Bomis. I'm not sure that the Israelim were entitled. But whatever the case is, Moshe Rabbeinu was so holy that he was a kohen without being a kohen. Moshe Rabbeinu was a kohen without big day kahuna. Aaron and his children needed the big day kahuna. So he says, "V'hu masha mediyu be'emil lechavad v'geimen." Aaron needs kavod ulSifares. Loyme to teach us. Lo yitachshav, do not think. Ki abegadol matzarech aveda levad, that it's an imperative. You must have these garments for the avodah. In which case, v'yischayev adavar l'leibsha Moshe, that would mandate that Moshe also should wear them. Ba'avedas yemei hamiluim, during the service, during the days of his initiation in the Beis HaMikdash. Says there Chaim v'leikin who it's not the case. Einem el Lkovd v'geimed, therefore honoring. Says the Erachayim l'misharis kavu alavidas, to a servant who is fixed in that service. Aval tzad ha'aveda levad, the work itself, kishetihya, if it could possibly theoretically be bezulas adnavan, of somebody other than Aaron and his children, yavdu b'chaluk lov, and they could serve Hashem with a white tunic, or k'mesha kain shimish Mesha, as Mesha did Keniska, as he mentioned before. Let me give you a simile for this. And I must tell you, I'm swimming in uncharted waters, and I don't have a parachute or a tube. I don't know what I'm doing. This is my hunch. There's a very interesting sikha from the Rebbe, which is in itself, it's a window into a world. We're closed-minded. We have a lot of preconceptions about Torah. We assume a lot of things. And a lot of the things that we assume actually make the Torah smaller, and they're rooted in ignorance, Pashat. We just don't know. We're not informed. The Rebbe has a Sikha, which is a similar idea, but it's extremely enlightening. And only the Rebbe would think of something like this, because it's literally thinking outside the box. The Torah says that Moshe Rabbeinu was a melech. Vahi b'Yeshurun melech b'sas nefesh hayom yachad shedisot pasuk Chumash. Vahi b'Yeshurun melech. Yeshurun means the Jewish people had a king. Who was the king of Yidden? Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe didn't have a melech, as did Yehoshua, his successor. What does it mean, practically speaking? Moshe Rabbeinu had authority to do. We spoke about it this morning. To come up with exceptions. You could make punishments for people without a Sanhedrin. Moshe Rabbeinu had a lot of power. Moshe paid its gedder as a king. He had legal right to take over somebody's private property and pay them for it, as a king has the authority to do, and so forth and so on. Moshe was a melech. So the Rebbe asks in this Sikha, if Moshe Rabbeinu was a king, how come he was never anointed? He was never officially elevated to that position. And the question is especially pronounced when it comes to Yeshua ben Nun. Yeshua was his successor. He was a melech. He was never anointed. The first king who was anointed was Shaul HaMelech. Why were Yeshua and Moshe Rabbeinu not anointed? You understand the question? You understand the question? And the Rebbe answers, and I'm paraphrasing. I'm going to add a little kvetch here, right? We know how disappointed Shmuel HaNavi was when the Jews asked for a king. Remember? Correct? So why was it good for Moshe Rabbeinu and Yeshua ben Nun to be Malachim? And the answer is very plain. The Rebbe says like this. It's based on Chassidus, but it's also based on the Rambam. What's a king? What's a king? A king is the most powerful man in the nation. He answers to nobody except for God. The famous words of the Rambam, Ein olav ela havaya Lkovd. There's nobody above a king except for the Eibishter. This is the definition of a melech. Most powerful position in the nation. What's his role? Lechazik das ha'emes. A king, a civil leader, a political leader, a civil leader, his job is to strengthen das ha'emes, to strengthen Yiddishkeit. That's his job. To make Yiddishkeit better and stronger. That's his function. The Eibishter made a king to strengthen Yiddishkeit. That's what he has to do. So when a king is anointed, he's given several duties, in not necessarily in this order, to strengthen Yiddishkeit, and to fortify the borders, to make Jewish people feel safe, and eventually to build a base of Mikdash. Those are the functions of a melech. That's his job. What empowers him? He's anointed. It says that Rebbe Moshe Rabbeinu and Yeshua were adukim in the Torah. They were so attached to the Torah that they were self-anointed. They were so one with the Torah they didn't need to be anointed. In other words, if the whole role of a king is to strengthen Yiddishkeit, and he takes that power from the Torah, why do you have to anoint a melech? Because anointing him is giving him that power. In other words, he doesn't naturally have that power. If he naturally has the power of melucha, you don't have to anoint him. He's already anointed. Moshe Rabbeinu did not need to be anointed. He was a melech because he and the Torah were one. So I'm thinking that the Chaim HaKodsh is saying the same thing. A Kohen is a Kohen because he wears special clothes. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't need special clothes. He was a Kohen. The clothing are to the Kohen, in a way, what the anointing is to a melech. It creates his connection with the Torah and his authority to strengthen Yiddishkeit for the whole of Klal Yisrael. Without the anointing, who asked you? Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't need to wear special clothes. He himself is be'etzem, of servant of the Eibishter. He doesn't need any garments. So the Rechaim is interesting, I think. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But if I'm right, it's interesting. He is saying a whole new issue. There really is no limits about a Kohen. Anybody can be a Kohen. Just one requisite. Just be as holy as Moshe Rabbeinu. That's it. That's a small detail. If you're as holy as Moshe Rabbeinu, no trouble. You know, Uzzah's problem was he thought it was Moshe Rabbeinu. He wasn't. Yeah, there's a Rambam, which the Rebbe quotes often, that the Rambam says, the Shemona Prakim, the Rambam talks about spiritual growth. Is a person go higher and higher and higher and higher. What's the highest level any human being can reach? To be as great a prophet as Moshe Rabbeinu. But he says it's so matter of fact, like, sure, everybody, tomorrow, next week, maybe in a month, before Nisan, before Pesach, will reach Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was such a great person that he didn't need to be crowned to be a king, and he didn't need clothing to be a Kohen. He was a Kohen.
If somebody is on the level that he was able to go up to Shemayim,
No.
come back, for him anointing is only in a way.
You're correct, except for one question. We follow laws, halachas. It's not a chassidus malav malka. It's dinim. The chiddush is that this is a din in Torah. What's that Chaim HaKodesh saying? The Eibush that puts the words, the Lkovd, ulSifares into the Torah to tell you that a kohen who needs Lkovd and Tifares to be kohen needs begodim. If you are on a level that in order to be a priest you need to be made beautiful, you need clothes. But if you're on a level that you're automatically a servant of the Eibush, then you don't need the big day kahuna, because the Lkovd and Tifares are already yours. Think about it. The chiddush of this Chaim, I don't know if it's true, but I think, is to say that al pi halacha, it's possible to be a kohen without big day kahuna, if you don't need the big day kahuna to provide you with the Lkovd and Tifares. The point is, in other words, this is not a spiritual idea. It's not a chassidish idea. It's part of Torah. It's part of halacha, in effect. Because the kohen on a lower level, they need big day kahuna. That's how you would read it.
So is it a little bit like Abraham, that you say he was a Merkava? Because he was just one with, I guess, that same parallel?
Moshe Rabbeinu is higher than Avraham Avinu.
Yes.
But the same idea. The point is, there's aspects of halacha that govern specifically Moshe Rabbeinu, that govern nobody else Moshe Rabbeinu, that puts him in a different category because of his connection to the Eibishter. It's quite interesting. Now, I'm not sure this is Pshat Ner HaChaim, that's number one, and I'm not sure everybody's going to like this Ner HaChaim. Ner HaChaim was a Chassidish Yid, he was a holy man. There's a past for him. For Ner HaChaim to say this makes sense, and the fact that it exactly is synchronized with the Rebbe's Asicha is also very interesting. The Rebbe says exactly the same point by Moshe being a king. I mean, I'm understanding Pshat over here from that Sicha, so if I'm reading it wrong, it's the Rebbe's fault, which is not so terrible, I suppose. Okay, that's the Erechaim. Now the Erechaim has the second half. We'll get to Erechaim later. This is all Pshat. Now, there's a Medrash on page 7. You know what? We'll go back to the Medrash. I'll come back to the Medrash. Go to page 9. Page 9 is at Al-Bag. I got to tell you, sometimes when I prepare a class, I have too much material.
Wow.
Page 9. Sorry? Sometimes I have too much material. This week, I actually didn't. You cooked the hin, cooked the head. The Abarbanel didn't really worry about the repetition 3 times. Same thing 3 times. Make clothes, make clothes, make clothes. The alshich had very little to say. The Ralbag has a vort that I want to share. And it's typical of that Ralbag as a philosopher. Everything has to make sense. Right? It says like this. I made 2 arrows. You see, there's a higher arrow and a lower arrow. I don't know if you realize, but I actually just 2 different pages. At the top of your page, it says Shin Ayin Dalet. I wrote on the margin page Shin Pei Vav, because the second half of the page, I cut and pasted. Okay, I wanted to save time and money. Let's read the first arrow quickly. We're going to get back to it later. But the first arrow says, Lkovd ulSifares, that the big day kahuna to be honored for beauty. So he brings the halacha. Lamadnu mized, this teaches us, Shu Mechuyev, that it was imperative, Sheyiyu Eila Begodim, these garments should be ba'oifen in such a way, Sheyiyu Lkovd ulSifares, they should be honoring the kohen and beautifying the kohen. If they weren't in this way, Kemai, for example, Shabalu, if they were worn out, or Nikru, they had been torn, or Kreatim and so forth, so they were unfit. They did not have weavers in the Beis HaMikdash who did repairs. They made new ones. They didn't fix the old ones. The old ones were used for psilim, as I mentioned to you before. In the next shtikele, you see the way that Al-Bag operates in his commentary on Chumash is, he has 2 sections on every parsha, on every shtikele. Pirush HaMilim, which translates the words, and then he says Hatoy Eliyos, the benefits, what we derive. And he has very interesting styles. Sometimes it's tielas b'musar, sometimes tielas b'seichel, different, sometimes tielas b'halacha. He says, what do we learn practically from these parshas? And it's quite incisive. So page Shin Pei Vav, he's revisiting the same psukim, but now he's giving you the benefits. V'hinei nitztavu. You see where I'm reading? We were commanded, sheyiyu lahem begodim yuchad, they should have special clothing be'eis havai during the service, that yiyu lahem lechavoid ulSifares. It should be for the Jewish people for honor and grandeur and beauty. So he says 2 points. Number one, Ki bazeh mehahider v'hakoved l'shem yisala. It honors the Eibishter. If the Eibishter's servants are dressed beautifully, it beautifies the Eibishter. Right? The Bigdei Kahuna are part of the Beis HaMikdash. They're part of the sanctuary. The holy house of God is beautiful. The people walk around dressed in a way that honors the Eibishter. And then he says im. But there's another issue. And I want you to know that he goes into very long discussions in his style, Kedarkev, that Al-Bag, explaining the Choshen and the Ephod, that was all had to do with putting the Kohen in a certain frame of mind. But now he says it very quickly. Shezati yesiba, dressing this way affects shetizboided machshavtam, that the Kohenim's minds should become singular, should become focused. Be'ez ha'avoide b'shevet halo, as they worked only on the Eibishter. V'liyishlachu machshavtam b'nyana machedim, their minds, their thoughts should not wander to other things, but to examine them. Ki heim einom ato, because of the clothing they were wearing, they were not then ba'oifen shahayu, in the same way, in the same outfit, in the same frame of mind that they were, keidam hishtadlusam ba'avoida, prior to their entry into the Beis HaMikdash. Kishekvar nichnesu, once they had already entered, b'gvul ha'kedusha naflo, on the perimeter, in the fence of the wondrous holiness, b'lof sham eila b'godim, in wearing these clothes. On a simple level, what the Rambam is saying, the Eibishter wanted them to dress differently in the Beis HaMikdash, so that they should know they were in a different place. You don't wear this clothing at home. You weren't even allowed to wear these clothing when the Avodah was finished. If a Kohen left, like I said to you earlier, the Kohen didn't have to take off his clothes 1 second after he finished, but he was not allowed to sleep in the Bigdei Kohen, and if he did, he was male. Couldn't keep him. He had to wear different clothes. The mere fact that when you go into this place, you dress differently, tells you that you should be in a different frame of mind. You follow?
So they should know, or could you say that the clothing had in them a kedusha, that it literally affected its wearer?
That's wonderful, but that's not Ralbagian. That's very Hasidish. That Ralbag doesn't say those kinds of things. That Ralbag speaks about the mind, not about the soul. Ralbag would say that the clothing, the design of the clothing, affected people's personalities. On a simple level, it was the mere fact that they wore different clothes. On a deeper level, it was these specific garments. The way the clothing were tailored, the way the clothing were designed, elicited from any wearer a certain sensitivity, a certain sentiment that affected their readiness to serve the Eibush in the Beis HaMikdash. You understand? The Gemara says, clothing honor a person. These clothing honor the Kohen vis-a-vis himself. Because that's the truth. Clothing honoring a wearer means, first of all, to yourself. If you don't honor yourself, the other people's honor is not meaningful. The Gemara says, nice clothing makes you feel a certain way. Mabushim noim, the Gemara says, machivim daitishaladim. They have an impact on the person. These clothing, the nature of the clothes, elicited a sense of self-honor, a sense of seriousness and responsibility and holiness, which incidentally corroborates and underscores the Rechaim. Moshe didn't need this. He didn't need this. Moshe was fine. Moshe didn't need this. He didn't need this because he was Moshe Rabbeinu. He was so tuned in that Bechaluk Lavan, he was the same Kohen. Made no difference. This is that Al-Bag. Okay, a small little kvetch.
When he said Chaluk Lavan, it means the most simple.
A white gown. Yeah, whatever people wore, that's what he wore. He wore what people wore. He dressed everybody dressed. Now, the Panim Yafas, which is on page 10, also has something to say. And after we do the Panim Yafas, we're going to go back and do the Medrash. The Panim Yafas says like this. He says very simple stuff, but nice. The Pasuk says, "Vasisa big dekedesh la'adam nachicha." You have to make holy clothing to your brother Adam, Lkovd ulSifares, for honor and for beauty. Right? Right? We're all wondering, what does it mean for honor and beauty? Obviously they're honorable. Obviously they're beautiful. We know how they were made. They were honoring and beautiful. So you have a bunch of different insights, right? That Ramban, I think, still stands out. The Ramban says because it was reflecting the honor of the beauty of the era, of the time, right? The Panim is very poshut. Some clothing were covered and some clothing were teferes. That's all. Vasisa big dekedesh v'geimel Lkovd ulSifares okte lefi pshuta yesh lefarish. Mata Amar Kaved is the Ksedes in the middle. What does Kaved mean? Beautiful clothes. Tiferes means adornments, decorations. The tzitz is not a piece of clothing. It's a piece of jewelry. See, he translates with pashtus. Some of these outfits were covered. They were malbushe covered. They were honorable clothes. And some of them were tiferes. They were beautiful decorations. They were jewelry. They weren't clothes. Good pashut. It's so simple. The Panamiyofas Maltabim Zachaver. And then if you scoot down 6 lines, he brings the Gemara, clothing honor a person. Right? And then he says ulSifares. You see, I circle the word ulSifares. It goes on the breastplate and the apron and the head band. They weren't clothes. They were decorations. They were jewelry. ulSifares for the sake of beauty. Verstehst?
What's the tachas?
Sorry?
What's tachas? Where's it coming from?
This is going on the Gemara about Rabbi Yochanan. Alt from Lenin. You can learn it yourself. Rabbi Yochanan called it a man mechabdus. Rabbi Yochanan said that clothing honor a person. In tachas kavede, the clothing take the place of the honor of the person, which is underneath the clothes. You have self-dignity, and the clothing bring it forward. But okay, it's not, the details of that Gemara are not so important to us. The essence of the Gemara is more important. But he translates Lkovd to ulSifares. Some begodim were covered, and some begodim were ulSifares. It's so simple and it's gavaldik. I think it's gavaldik. And in the next shtickle,
The white and the gold?
No. You're not going to consider a necklace clothing. It's not clothing.
Oh.
It's jewelry.
Accessories, right.
It's an accessory, right?
Yeah.
So the Torah says, make them clothing, Lkovd or Tiferes. It's 2 different inyanim. One is to honor them, takeshena kleid, nice clothes, and the other is to beautify them, decorations, adornments, jewelry. And in the next paragraph he brings, I don't want to read it inside to save a little time, that there's 2 mitzvahs. One mitzvah was to make the clothing to beautify Titzave The Kohen, and the other mitzvah is that the clothing themselves should have a kedusha. The Mefarshim make a distinction between the way the clothing served to enhance the kedusha of the Kohen, and the idea that the clothing themselves had to be lishma. The idea that the clothing themselves had to have a kedusha. If you want to read it, you read it yourself.
Talking about is saying something else.
No, the opposite. The other thing. Sheyasa l'shem kedushas kahuna. It's 2 separate issues. One is that b'gdei aleim kedush kedushas aleim. That's the clothing affecting the koyanim, and then there was the idea that the clothing themselves had to be lishma. Now let's go back.
It's the same as Torah.
This is the part of the office. This is the Pichas, the Valaflor from Frankfurt. Page 7. Page 7, and then we'll do page 8. That's usually what happens. After page 7 comes page 8 in most occasions. Okay, we're going to skip the first shtickle. You can read it yourself. Lkovd ulSifares, near the bottom of the page. This is a long version of the Rambam. And by the way, this is a direct quote from Rambam. Mikan Omru, the rabbis teach us. See what I'm reading? Big day kahuna, the priestly garments, mitzvasan, the mitzvah was, shiyu chadoshim, they should be new. Noim, beautiful. Umishulashim, and long. Kederach big day hagadelim, like the garments of great people. You know, there's an interesting halacha, interessante halacha, which is the source of a kapata. Where does kapatas come from? It's an Eastern European dress. Who knows what? Chassidish shtick. There's a Rambam that says like this. They used to wear gowns, right? So when a person worked, they would roll up the gown. When a person rested, they would lower the gown. So the Rambam says that on Shabbos, everybody should lower their gowns. Because during the week, the men wore trousers, right? They wore pants or something underneath. And you can't schlep boulders or chop down trees with till your ankle gowns. They rolled them up. So the siman of Shabbos was that we got the mishulashim. Long clothing was a sign of rest. In other words, there's a source in halacha and nigla for a long coat, for a kapata. So the Medrash says, this is a Rambam, that one of the symptoms of a kohen was that he wore long clothes. In other words, they were not very conducive to work. It was holy. The Gemara says, Talmud Chacham Ikre Shabbos. A Talmud Chacham is called Shabbos. A whole week he wears Shabbos clothes. Why? He doesn't work. Not that he's sleeping, but he doesn't do the kind of labor that doesn't permit him to wear Shabbos decorated. A kohen was always decorated in honor. Kederech big diagedelim, as was the garment, the dress of the great people. Hayu mitushtoshim oy mukuroim, if they were worn out or torn, or too long for the kohen, or they were too short for the kohen, they were not kosher. Every kohen came to the Beis HaMikdash, he was fitted. You understand? A kohen came to the Beis HaMikdash, they fitted him. They got him the tailor, and they fitted him. And you have to understand, kohenim served in the Beis HaMikdash between 2 and 3 days a year. That's it. That's all. You had 24 weeks, but each week was a family, and the family was divided into 7 sub-families, but they are. So you work.
You had 24
Mishmaris.
And you had many more weeks. What's that? So
the week, a year has 54, 52 weeks. How many weeks? 52 weeks.
Each one got more than 2 weeks.
There's 2 weeks and then 2 weeks and a little. And you had 1 day out of that week, Sachag. Pesach and Sukkot and Shavuos, all the Kohanim were busy. But you got clothing, and when you finished with your clothing, nobody else wore them. They went into a cubby and they waited for your return trip.
The following year just repeated me?
Yeah. There were 24 weeks. There was a 24 weekly cycle. That family and that sub-family had their own windows, their own cubbies, where they would lock away their begodim. There were 96 cubbies, as they state, in the Beis HaMikdash, because there were 24 times 4. One for the mitznefes, one for the ksenis, and one for the avnim, one for the mechnasayim. And every kohen had his own.
But you had to give it to the cleaners first.
No. If they needed to be cleaned, it was replaced.
How could you get dirty?
They were kohenim zrizim. That's what the kohenim were kohenim.
Well, it sounds impossible. It's all that blood spritzing.
Yeah, they said the Gemara. The Gemara describes that the kohenim were pristine. They were spotless clean. The Gemara describes it b'muchash as a fact.
So it was one of the nisim that weren't mentioned, maybe.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. In any case, and then he brings another interesting thing. Oishe silkam ba'avneit. Yeah, you wear a gartel. Sometimes your outfit gets wrinkled up around the gartel. It's possible. It has to be stretched out. Va'avad avedase psula.
So if he lost 10 pounds?
Huh?
If he lost 10 pounds?
Then he had to get new das. In the Beis HaMikdash, he didn't worry about cholesterol, by the way. The whole deal was who could eat more meat. So it shouldn't go to Rahman Santa Neisa, to be burnt. The Gemara says it was a particular kohen that during his lifetime there was never Neisa. He ate whatever there was. And it was a big schus. He was eating kachim. Okay. And then he goes on to, I'll continue to read a little bit more. He says, Hayu meshuchakim, if they were rubbed out, Ay shayaruchim, if they were too long, v'silken ba'avneit, and you shorten them with the gartel, achenasa kimidase, till they fit you, v'avad, and you serve the ebish, that avodase ksher, they were kosher. V'chol beged mibig de kohuna, shenasa tzoyi, if your clothing became dirty, ein malabnin oisai, you didn't clean it. They didn't wash it. They pitched 8 now, they put it aside for wicks. You got new ones. You understand? This was the Beis HaMikdash. They were wearing fine linen. Very, very fine. And you know what else? It was freezing up on that mountain. And they were barefoot. And they were wearing clothing that was so thin it was sheer. Mamish sheer.
It says it was freezing?
It's a fact. It says in the Beis HaMikdash there was a committee of doctors whose job it was to heal the kohenim from stomach trouble from eating too much. You imagine having a normal diet and 3 days out of a year you gorge. They ate. You have to be careful how you say it. It was holy food, but they had to finish the karbanos to finish. So the Chazal say that they would push it sick. There was a place in the Beis HaMikdash where they had a Beis HaMikdash. There was a room in the Beis HaMikdash. There was always a fire, so the kohen can go warm up. It was cold. And they were wearing thin, fine clothes. Serving the Eibishter. Imagine the Kohen Gadol. He was there all the time. You know, when the Kohen Gadol was old on Yom Kippur, so they would warm up the water of the mikveh, as they state. Because Ein Shvus b'Mikdash. They would heat these metal poles, and they'd tevel it into the mikveh, the water would be warmed, and that's how the Kohen would tevel. Anisht was freezing. Okay, let's continue. I want to read this medrash. Why do I want to read this medrash? I don't know why I want to read this medrash. But let's do it backwards. On the left side of your page, I cut out a piece from the Chidah. The Chidah has a saved many Sfarim, but one of his Sfarim on Chumash is called Lechem and Hashamayim. And he says as follows, Ve'ela b'godim. These are the outfits that you should make. You see what I'm reading? Mm-hmm. So he says, Ef shaloimad, perhaps you could say, Kitevas ve'ela, that the word ve'ela is Rosh Tevas. Va'anvus, Adam, Lamad, Hillel. The humility of man you could learn from Hillel. Okay? Ve'ela b'godim is a remez that I suppose you should say a kohen has to be humble. The humility of a man is derived from Hillel. Lirmeis, it's a hint to Mashakos al b'Shabbos, and the Gemara says in Masechta Shabbos, Ve'ela b'godim sheyasu tanu rabbanim. The Gemara says, Ve'elam yi adam anvus and kihillel v'chuli. You should always be humble like Hillel and so forth. Ayin sham ba'aruch. The Medrash quotes this Gemara. So we'll finish the class with this Gemara. Tanu rabbanim, right side of your page. It's an interesting story. And it's an interesting story. I think about it. It's an interesting story. Maisa b'goy echad, there was a guy who apparently was young. Shahaya oiver achayre beis hakneses, was walking by a shul. V'shama kel tinik shahaya kaire. And he heard a little child reading. And what was the child saying? Ve'ela b'godam hashas, these are the clothing that they should make. Choyshin ve'efed u'me'il v'goymer. Omar, l'miya kavod az elami. Who gets so much honor, such beautiful clothes? They told him, okay, and godless belongs to the high priest. Because he stands and serves in the Mizbeach. Omar, so this person says, Eilech, I will go. There's Gayet, I will convert myself. Almanath, I'll be a high priest. And I too will be a high priest and serve the Eibishter on the Mizbeach. Herst, now I just want to interject, parenthesis. It just came up tonight in the Tanya class I had with my boys. The Rebbe has a sikha, which is delicious. On Pashas Koirach. Koirach says to Moshe Rabbeinu, I want to be Kohen Gadol. So Moshe Rabbeinu says to Koirach, I also want to be Kohen Gadol. You have to want to be Kohen Gadol, but not to be Kohen Gadol in fact, just want. The whole sikha. Gamani, if you don't want to be Kohen Gadol, there's something wrong with you. If you become Kohen Gadol, it's even worse. You have to want. You have to want. He says, it's good that you want to be Kohen Gadol, but it's supposed to be Kohen Gadol echad. So here's this kid who wants to be a Kohen Gadol. Says the Gemara, Bala lefnei Shammai Azak, and it came to the sage Shammai. I don't know if these are typos. Shammai is spelled Shin Mem Aleph Yud. I don't know if this is a typographical error. This is how the Teimaneh wrote. This is a Medrash from Teimaneh, from Yemenites. Amal Gayereini, he says to him, convert me, Almanath She'ei Kohen Gadol. On the condition that I'll be a high priest, V'ashamish b'kahuna gedel, and I'll be a Kohen Gadol. I'll gav him on the bech. It's about just the same Gemara, the same page, with the v'yahavta l'recha kamoicha on one foot. It's the same shtickle Gemara. Dachafei b'amas abinyan shabiyad. He picked up an amas abinyan, that means a ruler, a measuring stick, and he sent them flying. He says, you stick around and you get a few clap. V'amalei, and he says to him, Guda bisha. Guda bisha means shameful mazel. Guda means mazel. V'chileis maspeka b'Yisrael. There's not enough amongst the Jews. The nistapek b'umi alma we have to take from other nations to be a Kohen Gadol. We're doing fine. Baal of the Hillel Azak, and it comes to Hillel Azak, and Amalei says to him, Gaideni, convert me. Amanal shetasimeni Kohen Gadol, you'll make me a Kohen Gadol. Gaide. Hillel convert me. I suppose Hillel, this is the part of the Medrash which is interesting. The person says, I want to be converted on a condition, that means that you're fooling him. Hillel felt that he really wants to serve the Eibishter. He doesn't want honor, he really wants to serve the Eibishter. And you're supposed to want to be a Kohen Gadol. So he converted him not on the pretense that he's going to actually make him a Kohen Gadol, but that the want is the definition, is the way it's supposed to be. Amalei. And then he says to this fellow, now that I converted you, let me get you ready for your job. Klum ma'amidin lefnei hamelech. Can you then appoint to stand in front of a king, who knows the schemes, who knows the techniques of royalty? Lech lemad techsisei malch. Go ahead and study the techniques of war. Halach v'kara, he went and he read Mikra. V'lamad, and he learned Teresh Baal Peh, Teras Kenim, Kula Sefer Vayikra, with the Teras Kenim. Kiven she'egia lemikra zeh, till he came to the pasuk v'azara karav yumas, that no stranger is allowed, no alien is allowed. Amalehen. So this young boy says to the Rosh Yeshivas, Mikil Azel mi nemer. Regarding whom was this pasuk said? Amrullah yafilu al David Malach Yisrael. Even David Malach, even Uzzah is not allowed to be a Kohen. You understand? Moshe Rabbeinu, yeah, but not David Malach. But Yad Nasa Eisa Ager Kavachayim Be'atmo. So he said, listen, if David Malach can't be a Kohen Gadol, I suppose I can't be one either. Amar Ma im Yisrael, if Yidden that are called Banam Lamak. Aleim Amra Shechina, the Eibush tells them, Va'atam Tiyuli Mamechas Kohenim B'gei Kodesh, a nation of priests and a holy people. They're not allowed to be a Kohen Gadol. Okay, so for sure, I'm not allowed to be a Kohen Gadol. Skip 2 lines, okay? Miyad, immediately, nitpayes eise ageir me'elav. He was satisfied. He wasn't angry. He didn't feel cheated.
Because he was Jewish already.
He was like he was Jewish before he was Jewish. Api halacha, you could make the case that it wasn't a gear. The din is if you magash somebody else nigh on a condition, and the condition is not met, there was no gear. In Hillel's mind, he converted him not to be Kohen Gadol, but for wanting to be a Kohen Gadol. All the blessings of the world should be on your head. Had you treated me like Shammai Hazaken, like Hal Yisrael would not have joined the Jewish people. And then that's the Gemara. So the Chidah says that Rem is in the pasuk ve'ele, that when it comes to Kohuna, there has to be a certain kind of humility, and you'll learn that humility from Hillel and Nasi. Okay, so we learned a lot of stuff, right? We learned Eben Ezra, who says that the Lkovd ulSifares means to make the Kohen Gadol Moshe boast, to make him different. The Ramban's word, I think, is really, really significant. The Ramban says that they imitated what was considered grandeur, what was considered beauty at that time, because that's how the Eibishter works. He brings a state into the world to reflect the world at the time that it emerges, right? We had the Erechaim HaKodesh, who says that it's possible in theory not to need Big Day Kohuna, which was corroborated by the Ralbag saying that the Big Day Kohuna affect a certain concentration in the Kohen. We read the Rabbi Yossi, that the Lkovd ulSifares, some begodim are Lkovd and some begodim are Titzave, and then we had a few midrashim. So Tuesday we're going to do the Ramban again, but there's a Kabbalah after the Ramban, which is also the Kanti. Then there's a Kabbalah after the Erechaim HaKodesh. There's a very beautiful Shach, which seems to me very consistent with Chassidus. And then there's a Maimeh, which I haven't copied for you yet, that's going to explain why it says 3 different times to make this big. Okay. Thank you.